Welcome everyone to the podcast. Today in the cafe, I have Natasha Porizkova. Natasha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to have you on. This is our third conversation, right? And it's just been amazing getting to know you outside of the podcast, and I'm excited for the listeners to get to know you. So if you could take some time and just talk a little bit about yourself, about the work you do at Nika White Consulting, and we'll get into some fun and awesome topics.
Great. So yes, I work at Nika White Consulting. I've been there since July. We are a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm. We are a fully remote team. So while Nika initially founded the firm a few years ago, this year we've expanded a great deal as a result of George Floyd in May. That was kind of the sacrificial lamb, unfortunately, that he had to be murdered so publicly, but it led to a lot of organizations realizing the importance of diversity in the workplace. So she kind of blew up within the last few months and realized that she really needed more people. So she brought me in, and I work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager for the firm. So what that entails basically is we have a whole slew of clients from all over the states and all over the globe. Actually, we have some global clients that we work with, and we work with them some people hire us on for a one-off engagement to come in and do a kind of foundational training session. And we try to avoid the word training typically, but that's where we really give an opportunity for people within the organization to level set and learn some of those crucial terms, define what diversity, equity, inclusion means, the difference between equity and equality, power and privilege, all of these different things. And other organizations hire us on and have us come in as a retainer client. So we come in and we are really in the trenches, in the weeds with the people within the organization. So meeting with different stakeholders, both at entry, mid, the top level, all of the different levels within the organization, and do focus groups, which kind of turn more into group therapy, kind of having people talk through what's going on in the organization, getting a sense of, what's the culture like? And a lot of times it starts out, everything is amazing, we are so happy, which is great. But then it kind of, as the conversation goes along, it's like, oh, well, there's that one thing and there's this other thing, which is not bad. It's just pretty standard for organizations. But we work to get that qualitative data to see what are the changes that need to be made in this organization, do surveys, work with different organizations. We have our own podcast that we host every Friday where we bring in different speakers from the within the DEI field. And it's kind of a whole every day is different.
Yeah. Is that I believe you guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it Courageous Conversations? Is that what it is?
It's intentional conversations.
Intentional conversations.
Yes.
I have yet to join one of those, and I get the invites, and I can't wait till my calendar aligns because I'm excited about those. My friend Jennifer Brown does those. Actually, I think that may be how you and I
that's how we
initially connected.
We're both Jennifer Brown fans.
Yes. I love when, companies like yours and what Jen is doing have those reoccurring kind of like build. I think that is huge. And that was the idea behind even this podcast, is just to have those conversations. But you guys are doing it at a much grander scale, and I think that's amazing. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. What I would like to do is kind of our first topic of discussion is, I know one of the things we connected on was you were looking to make kind of that pivot from your current industry and background, what you were doing, I believe in marketing, to full D&I, right? The passion kind of bubbled up and it was like, it's here, it's time to do something. I want to do this all the time, every day, day in, day out. Let's talk a little bit about your journey and how you made that transition, and, the challenges that somebody may face making that transition. And if you even face some of those challenges, how did you overcome them? Let's spend some time talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do come from a background in marketing and content creation, heavily involved in the social media side of things. I'd been doing that within the performing arts space specifically, so working with
Hmm.
Broadway, concerts, comedians, dance companies, pretty much anything that you can think of within the performing arts gamut. It's spectrum. I've worked with it, and I did that for about 7 years. And while I was working in the performing arts and doing marketing, I didn't realize that how much I cared so much about the inclusion and diversity within my own staff at my last organization. And one day it just really hit me that there were some inequalities and inequities at my last organization. And that's kind of what spurred all of this
Hmm.
for me. So at the time, I was unaware that this was a whole career path that you could take. I was
Yeah.
doing a lot of this work tangentially in my own way. I had started a queer collective for women back in Dallas. So I'm from Dallas. I live in Boston now, but I started this collective because in Dallas I noticed that there was a lack of events for queer women that had nothing to do with drinking. There were
Hmm.
a couple events a month, and they were all about going to the bars, getting really drunk, which is maybe great on occasion, but all the time is not
Yeah.
necessarily a great idea
Those days
or
are gone for me.
yeah.
It's a
And
gray hair
and
stop
knowing
that.
and knowing like my partner, she doesn't drink, and I was like, well, that's not very inclusive of her to have these events that are at bars and are just focused on drinks.
Yeah.
So I worked on creating this collective of women to come together and have a community and have other events and other opportunities. So one of the first things that we started was a monthly trivia that was surrounded around the show The L Word, which is really popular within the queer women's community. We did a workout series called Sweat. We did a, a Yappy Hour, which was at a dog park that also has like a restaurant within it. So we had
Hmm.
people bring their dogs and hang out one afternoon. We had all sorts of different events that happened. We did art events. We went and did an art talk at one of the museums in Dallas. And so it was just a way to offer different opportunities. But I
Hmm.
did not know that this was in the scope of DE&I because this was just a passion project for me. I was just doing it
Yeah.
because I wanted people to feel included, especially those who had just maybe recently come out and didn't know where to go, who to connect with, because I knew for myself when that happened, I didn't know where to go to find community. There was one lesbian bar in Dallas, and I was like,
Yeah.
every time I go there, there are like 5 people there, and that's it. And this is the only way to meet people, I guess. So I wanted to create those opportunities essentially.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so towards the end of last year, September of 2019, I attended the company HubSpot. They have a conference every year called Inbound. Are you familiar with Inbound by
No,
any
no,
chance?
I'm not.
So Inbound's really phenomenal. I attended for the first time last year. This year, of course, like everything else, it was totally virtual, but they don't even like to call it a conference. It's more of an event. It's a week long, and they bring in speakers of all ranges. They've had Michelle Obama.
Oh,
They
wow.
had like comedians that bring in like Chelsea Handler. I saw Jennifer Garner, Katie Couric. They bring in like big names, but it touches all aspects of business. So it's focused a little bit around marketing, but all the other pieces as well within business. And so the co-founder of the organization, Dharmesh Shah, was speaking, and he was talking about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Because when HubSpot was founded, I believe it was six men who were MIT MBA graduates, and
Mm.
he was the one non-white man in the group, and how that was a little bit ostracizing for him. Even though he was included in the group, he realized that this was not a fruitful place that would foster difference. And so he really focused and worked to grow the organization out with that in mind. And that was the moment that the light bulb turned on, and I realized this is a career path you can take. and it was just like that aha moment.
Yeah.
And from that moment on, I was like, I'm energized, I'm ready, this is the path, this is where I need to go.
Mm.
And so at the end of last year, my girlfriend and I, we moved across the country from Dallas to Boston for her job, and that was the push I needed to quit my job and really make a full-time commitment to moving into the space.
Yeah.
And as you know, this year was crazy. The pandemic hit in March, and right when I was looking for jobs, everyone was losing their jobs. Jobs were going off the market,
Yeah.
especially DE&I roles. That was kind of the first thing to go, that organizations we're like, well, this isn't necessarily making us money. Let's get rid of this.
Yeah.
So I was having a really hard time finding anything. And, I was like, if I can't find a job right now, I'm just going to continue to educate myself so that I can make this shift when the time comes and an opportunity presents itself. So I went on Eventbrite one day. I started searching for anti-racism events, diversity events, belongingness events, and I looked up anything I could, and I registered for a ton of events. I ended up going to a panel discussion that Jennifer Brown was a speaker on.
Yeah.
I connected with her. I said, I'd love to learn a little bit more from you. And she plugged me into the community calls, which is how you and I met. Yeah. And I just went hard in the paint, and I connected with as many people as I could. In the events, everybody drops their LinkedIn in the chat. And so I was like, I'm going to connect with everyone in here.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, because I've met the most phenomenal people, you included, Joe. And I was like, I'm just going to reach out to all these people, even if they're willing to give me a half hour of their time to kind of learn their own personal stories of how they got into this work.
Yeah.
Because I was starting from not with no background, but with not that like resume background of, I had a past role in this work. And so I started connecting with people left and right. I connected with a woman, Christina Smith, who we ended up working together, her and another woman, Dr. Margot Hovey. We did a racial dialogue series called Death Defying Dialogues. That was just an opportunity for me to kind of dip my toes in the space and add another, a thing to my resume of some background and some experience. I also connected with a ton of other people, and I would ask them, how did you get into this space? And most of the times people are like, well, I just kind of fell into it, which was wonderful for them, but it didn't really help me to get there. And so I just kept pushing. I kept saying, if I can connect with anyone who will maybe be able to connect me to this person and this person and that person. My girlfriend's dad, her dad's phrase is, your network is your net worth. Yeah. And so I was like, I'm just going to continue to grow my network. Although I don't always love the word network because it makes it sound like it's transactional, and I really like to become friends with the people that I meet.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I picked a few people out from that, and I was like, Jennifer Brown was one of them. Nika was another. And I reached out and I said, hey, I have a background in marketing and content creation, and I would love to volunteer my time to you to help with your social presence, whatever you need. And in exchange, if you could just expose me to the world of DE&I. And I was fortunate enough that with Nika, she was like, well, I can pay you to do it for part-time. That was ideal. I was offering for my free time, free services, and she offered to pay and bring me on as a part-time. And so I did. And it wasn't necessarily exactly what I wanted to do. She knew that I wanted to move into DEI solely, and that was be my main function of the job. But it was something to at least dip my toes in the time being. So during that time, I also actually was in the interview phase with HubSpot. Actually, they had a position open for their diversity, inclusion, and belonging manager. And I went through 5 weeks of interviews with the organization. I was in the final 5 candidates, and the whole way through it was going really well, and they were all energized. And towards the end, I was like, I don't think I got it because of the lack of responses I was getting. And I didn't get the job, and I was devastated, and I was heartbroken. And I was like, I spent 5 weeks working so hard to get this position. And at the end of the day, they said, we decided that your background was more of a side project. And I was like, well, of course it's a side project because I'm trying to get into this space full time. Oh. And so that was pretty diminishing, to be completely transparent.
Yeah.
And they were like, we went with someone who had 5 years experience in the field. And I was like, well, there are not many of those people who have that kind of experience in the field. And so, truthfully, I sat in bed for a day. I cried. I ate ice cream. I got really sad and let myself feel the feelings I had. And then the next day I said, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to keep going because, I can't see the road ahead all the way. I know that there's something there.
Yeah.
So I kept pushing, I kept connecting with people, I kept reading copious amounts of books, attending Jennifer Brown's conversations, connecting with people one-on-one. And the opportunity arose that Nika decided that she needed to hire on someone as a DEI manager, and that's what was able to make that change. And I took the job, and I've been there as the DEI manager now for 3-4 months.
Yeah.
But it was a long road. There was a
Yeah.
lot of failure. There was a lot of lulls where I just didn't know where to go. I was like, if I could just get a marketing job so much easier than this, but I didn't want to. And I had the safety with my partner. I was very lucky that I didn't necessarily need to be making the money at the time. I know that's a huge barrier for a lot of people, but ultimately it was 100% worth the wait, and I couldn't be happier. So that's a little bit of how I got into this work.
Yeah, I remember seeing your LinkedIn change when you made your update. And I remember being so excited. I think I texted you,
Yeah,
and
you
I was
did.
just I was just overjoyed because I know the challenges. It is so. I mean, before my career in anything corporate, I mean, I was in the military, right? And a lot of veterans have, they don't get into their dream job until several years after they left the military. For me, it was instant. I was really, really lucky. But to get into the D&I space, for me, it was a challenge too. Um, I don't think it was as challenging as a lot of people, because I had built a very robust network of a lot of HR professionals and stuff like that. And over the past several years, D&I is just built up. I mean, it's the fastest executive role. It's the fastest growing executive role on the planet, not just in the U.S., but on the planet, right? That these companies and organizations are building these roles. So I think that, and I was kind of at the bottom of that when that was starting to build up, right? For me, I'm going to be honest with you. The challenges that I face now, are now that I have 5, 6, well, almost 7 years now in the space, working for really big companies, been doing strategy and processes for it successfully. But I'm having a hard time moving past where I'm at now in the space and getting into those like manager, director roles. And the challenge that I get, or the feedback that I get back, and I have a friend, John Carlson. I don't know if you know John.
Yes, John's
Um,
great.
it's well, this is a podcast, it's a safe space. I can say this. The feedback we get is because we're not a person of color and we don't represent underrepresented minorities, or John was specifically told by someone that they didn't go with him because they didn't feel like the program would be taken serious if it was run by a white person. And now there's words for that, right? But those are the challenges I'm having now that I am actually in the field, right? But that's not a holistic challenge, right? There's way more organizations that understand that's not the deal, and the community that we're in understands that. But it's hard to hear, it's a challenge, because for you and I mean, this is way more than a profession, it's a passion. And I guess my whole point in sharing that, here and with you is, I think even as you grow and you may see even more challenges and harder challenges than getting into the field. But I love what you said about your network is your net worth. That's true. That is 100% true. The building of the network, the building of the relationships. And I hear you when you say network is kind of a, cringy word. I activate my network. I use an activated network. And what I mean by that, on LinkedIn, every week I try to connect with at least 2 to 3 people out of my network that I've never talked to. One person will be completely disconnected from D&I. It'll be just in like an IT industry, HR, finance, or someone. I find their profile very interesting. I just want to have a call with you and just chat and learn about you. And then others will be in D&I or HR, something like that, right? Or be just doing something wicked cool, like with an organization or something. Yeah. And that's engaging your network, and that's how opportunities come about. That's how, and I think that's one of the things you and I initially talked about is look, educate yourself and
Mm-hmm.
network. And that's how you do it. And it sounds like it worked. All of this has worked really well for you. And I'm so happy for you. So,
Yeah. And on that, another part that led me to get to where I am, which I didn't mention, I'm glad you brought up that piece about LinkedIn. I was not a very active LinkedIn user
yeah,
before all of this. I'll be totally honest. I seldom, if not ever, posted on LinkedIn. It was
yeah,
something that every once in a while I'd get a notification via my email that'd be like, someone's viewed your profile or someone has asked to connect with you. And I was like, okay. And it would happen every once a month. And one of the
right.
biggest things that I learned from all the people as I went through this journey was get active on LinkedIn, be regularly posting on LinkedIn. And John specifically, he's like, I try to post multiple times within a day
Yeah,
when I met with him. And so I really had to push myself and be intentional about getting content on and out through LinkedIn, because
yeah,
while I may not have been doing work within the space, at least if somebody was considering me for a position, they could look at my LinkedIn and see that I had some of my own thought leadership in this space,
yeah.
and that I was active and clearly passionate and working towards it. Uh, so I'm glad you brought up that LinkedIn piece, because that was a big part of how I got to be where I am. And I will say, to your point about not wanting to hire you or John specifically in the situation that he just had, I do have major issues with that personally, of course. And even the definition of diversity within this space has changed so many times throughout the years, because when they first went to market, the definition was the political and no, that's not the right one. I was pulling it up so I could read it. No, it is the political and social policy of encouraging tolerance for people of different backgrounds. So that's what they first went to market with a long time ago. And it was, it was okay for a while, until they realized that the word tolerated had a really negative
Yeah,
connotation to it.
yeah.
And in our sessions, we use an example of being like, after this, if I was like, Joe, let's go to the cafe again and let's hang out, and next time I want to bring my friend Mindy, and you're like, oh sure, you can bring Mindy, I'll tolerate her. That would not make Mindy feel nice.
No.
Hearing you're tolerated doesn't sound great. And so then they went back and they redefined it again, and this next time they said fairness, equality, respect, and inclusion for women, people of color, or other minority groups. And when that happened, white men felt very left out, and they were like, we want this to change. We want fairness. We want equality. We want to be respected and included. And so they changed the definition of diversity with that in mind, because that was excluding white men. So they changed it to be diversity, point, or respect in which things differ. So, to say that we don't want to hire you because you're a white man, I think it's very, there's a long way to go in that organization if that's how they feel, because white men do need to be included in the conversation.
Yeah, I have a couple really strong mentors in the field, and both of them are, of different race, ethnicity, and background than myself. And I've had this conversation with them. I remember after a job interview one time, I was just completely deflated because all the conversation started, as a white male, how can you, because you're a white man, I mean, these were the questions, right? And I felt really deflated, and I started doubting, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to, is this the right, am I doing the right thing? Is this the right, I mean, it feels right, but so, the mentorship that I've gotten from them over the past, I would say year or two, regards, just has helped out a lot in having those conversations. And you're exactly right. I don't think companies are doing this like with malice. I think that they are just so worried about getting things wrong because this is so important and so critical. I just don't think they're equipped yet in their exposure to this and how to handle it, that they know how to handle it correctly. So,
Yeah,
um,
and fear of doing the wrong thing has really become an issue, because people want to get it right, and we're
right.
human, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to say the wrong thing, we're going to do the wrong thing, and that's okay, because like I said, we're human, but diversity is not just about the optics, are you a man or a woman? What's your race? What's your age? What's your gender? All these things. It's also about all of the like little bits and pieces that we can't see,
Yeah.
your thinking style. Are you a parent or not? Are you married or not? Where are you located geographically? There are all these other aspects that I find people that are not necessarily ingrained in this space think of diversity as just like the optic part of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. So Natasha, we have some time left. There is another topic I know we wanted to talk about, and that's about something you mentioned is culture fit versus culture add. So let's talk about that a little bit, kind of define a little bit about what you mean by that, and let's talk through it.
Absolutely. So culture fit versus culture add is one of my favorite topics of discussion. I can really just talk about it for a long time. So during this year, I had that interview with HubSpot. I also had 4 other interviews that were all 5-week long processes.
Wow.
So 5 times 5 weeks, a lot of interviews. And every single time I was in the interview, every time I would hear, "You're a great culture fit for this company. Like, I know you will fit in so well." And, that's always said to be a compliment. But if you really think about it in the grand scheme of things, it is a compliment, but it isn't at the same time. Because if we're saying that someone's going to be a culture fit, it means you're already like the people who work here. Whether that's you look like them, you have a similar background to them, you talk like them, you're going to assimilate to the current culture well. And when we say that someone is a culture add, that means that this person, they are not the same as us. They have differing perspectives. They have differing backgrounds. They can bring more to help us grow. Because if we keep adding people who are similar to us and that are like us, we're going to perpetuate sameness. And so by putting emphasis on culture add, we're working towards the future. We're working on growing and growing better and stronger. And so I don't love culture fit at all, because every interview I've ever been in, both this year and any other time, it's always, "Oh, you're a great culture fit." And so I really challenge people that if you have hiring power or you're in a panel of interviews, not telling the person that they're a culture fit, telling them that they'd be a culture add. And then when you sit and make those decisions of who's going to get the job, think, if you say this person's a culture fit, is that going to choose that you're not going to pick the other people because they're a little bit different than you? So that's a little bit of it in a nutshell.
So culture add, how would you define the culture add? How can someone who's doing consulting explain, okay, this is what we mean by culture fit, but this is what you're really saying when we start talking about culture add? This is the perception that we want to give when we use that kind of language.
Yeah, so it's a little bit harder to describe it just because it is that difference in the, respecting and admiring and fostering difference.
Yeah.
But so even within my own organization, I'm a culture add because I come from a background in marketing and communications and content creation. I don't come from the world of DEI traditionally, but I bring all of those skills and all of those different facets of my last field into my new field. So I'm adding that to the organization. I'm also adding, my own personal identities. We were talking about, you being a white man. I am a woman of color, and people are often like, "Well, how are you a woman of color? Your name is like Eastern European. You look pretty white, especially in the wintertime." But I am mixed race. My dad is Mexican Native American, and my mom is white. But I absolutely identify as a woman of color. And so I think of that as a culture add to an organization. If we look at a candidate pool and we see a bunch of white candidates and we have an affinity bias towards them because maybe the people with the hiring power are white, they might want to align with the people that are also white.
Yeah.
So, thinking about all of the different ways in which you are different from the other people. So whether it's thinking styles or diversity optics or any of those different things.
Yeah, I think this is a valuable thing for companies to understand, especially within the area that I work a lot in within talent acquisition, right? And not only understanding that, but when companies and organizations have DE&I hiring initiatives and things like that, being able to explain that concept of of the value of the type of talent you're getting when you're bringing in diversity, I think that's important. I mean, I think there's a portion of culture add to even non-diverse hires and things like that, but specifically when it comes to uh, diverse talent and things like that, right? Because not only are you getting, their industry experience, right? Like in your case, it would be marketing and things like that, but you're also getting their life experiences, their culture experiences that, and I like to use sales teams because they are traditionally the most non-diverse teams you will find in organizations. When you bring in those different life experiences and professional backgrounds, you become a more innovative team, right? You become a higher, I'm just going to say, you become a higher value team. And, I recently had a conversation with a client who had a pretty diverse team optically, right? I mean, it was a team, I believe, of 8. There were equal representation of male, female, race, and ethnicity, and blame lack of coffee this morning. And you see, I'm sipping, kind of nursing on this.
Yeah.
People in the audio won't be able to see.
We are in the cafe.
That's right. That's why I made this a cafe, so I could drink coffee during the interviews.
I wish I left mine in the other room. Otherwise, I'd be.
It's okay. It's okay. But no, I think that, or no, back to my point. I kind of lost my train of thought there. And what I tried to get this team to understand, once you started looking at the team that was super, optically diverse, all of them went to the same school. They grew up in the same region of the companies, northeastern cities. They all worked for similar sized companies or the exact same companies, served in some of the exact same roles. And I'm talking all 8 of them. I mean, you could line these columns up and it was same schools, same regions. And so when I think of the term culture add, what you're talking about, this is a majorly diverse team. So that's there. But like the other portion is important as well, right? The difference, you want to make sure in building a truly inclusive organization that culture add encompasses not just the optics of race and ethnicity, but also those intangible traits and characteristics and experiences. And that's the way I define diversity and inclusion. And it's just a melting pot. It's much like how the military is, right? It's one goal, one mission, but we're from everywhere. We have all these different, and I think that's why it works so well. But does that make sense to you? Like,
yeah, actually, we had during one of our sessions yesterday, the CEO of one of my clients was using kind of a similar example that talking about a board, like just because, we have someone who went to Harvard, we have someone who went to Duke, we have someone that went to Yale, we're diverse, we come from different places.
mm-hmm.
If you really think about it, like that's not exactly like
2% of the country goes to those schools, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I don't really feel like I have a connection with from an education sense of someone who goes to Harvard or Yale.
Right. Exactly. And that's especially a big thing that we deal with when it comes to clients that, there's such this push for a certain level of education when culture add is thinking about people who maybe they don't have they didn't get a college degree. Maybe they went and worked in the field immediately because 1, they wanted to, or 2, they had to circumstantially, or they didn't have the funds to do so. And we're eliminating people by just saying, this is the bare minimum. If you don't meet these requirements, we're not interested in you. We need to foster people to come to the table, because just because someone doesn't have that education that you want or the traditional background that you want, it doesn't mean that they can't bring and add a great deal to your organization and your teams, because the diversity of thought is so important. And we find that a lot of times organizations don't use that. They kind of stick to the ways that they were, we've always done it this way, therefore we're going to just keep continuing to do it this way, and really challenging that. And so by bringing in that culture add, it really forces everyone to try and grow and be better and hold one another accountable.
I love it. This is the first time on the podcast that we've talked about this subject. Now, I just think it's important. And it's important for our organizations to understand that. And, it's something, I do a lot of training, right? And you do a lot of training and educating, right? And I think I hope this is something that people like you and I, we include in our training. I think it's important to get this type of message out there and get these definitions, because this is what companies, in my opinion, have a hard time doing, defining all of this: equity and inclusion, diversity, concepts like this. And if we can help them, right, as professionals in this field, to define these things for their companies and their organizations, I think that's where it starts. I'm a big believer in any time I build a strategy or process, it all starts with education, exposure, and defining what this means to you, what this is. And then once you do that, now we have another action, and that's moving past your commitment and going into the things. And it's understanding those types of concepts, Natasha, in my mind, it's key, right? It's key. I think the challenge
Absolutely.
is, though, I think the challenge for organizations is trickling that down, especially large ones, right? Because in your consulting, field, your strategies, I would imagine, are way different for your big companies versus your medium size. I hate the term mom and pop. I hate that term. I'm not going to use it, but the smaller businesses, it's different. It's different regionally, right? And they're under, if you're consulting with a company, let's say in the Southeast, let's say Texas, right? Let's say Georgia, where I'm at, right? There's gonna be a bigger learning curve in some of these companies than, say, in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, so I think that plays into a lot too. We have to meet people where they are, not where we want them to be. I think that's important. I love it.
We do have to meet them where they are and, help them move forward, make sure that they're held accountable to continue to do that forward trajectory.
Yeah.
But, we can't shame or guilt someone into moving along in this journey. That will only make them want to regress and go back and be like, well, why did I even get into this in the first place? Like, I'm not interested in doing this anymore because, I feel like I'm continuing to fail. But, we will fail a lot of times. It's just, like I said, we are human. I can't say that enough. That's why I'm constantly educating myself. I know I don't know everything. I am ignorant to plenty of things. And I think that ignorance gets a really bad rap. When we think of ignorant, we think of like, I don't know, people who live in really small towns and don't talk to anyone and like, and that's not what ignorance is. It's just a lack of knowing about things. So when I find out I'm ignorant to something, I'm like, well, I'm going to educate myself and learn about it. So
lack of exposure to it and lack of experience. And I can say this, experience and failure are the two things that always teach me the most, right? Being exposed to something, experience it, or totally bombing something, right? And I tell my team, or even I tell myself, if I know I'm going into like a hostile business group or just a company, when it comes to this. So when I say hostile, I'm talking about kind of like, hey, they have some concerns, pushbacks, is I immediately get into the mindset or encourage the mindset that, hey, anything they say outside of the appropriateness of what we're trying to do is not in malice. I assume best intentions immediately in this. They'll show you if there aren't any. They'll let you know, right? There's a quote that's coming to my mind right now, but I can't think of it. But I think that's the way we have to approach this, because they're looking to, people like you and I to help them get to where they need to be from both an experience position and and the end goal of an inclusive work environment, you know? So
Yeah,
it's busy work. It's crazy. We're in the, and
it is.
we're in the business of modifying behaviors and kind of changing the hearts and minds sometimes, right?
Yeah, it's actually absolutely changing hearts and minds. And, we can't do that without being personal, without being intentional, and really showing that we care about the people that we're working with.
Yeah.
A lot of times it does feel like therapy in a way, that when I'm
Yeah.
working with individuals from an organization, I come from a pretty toxic previous work environment. And so, I share that with individuals so that they know it's a safe space. Like, I'm here for you, I have your best interest at heart. I want to make the change within the organization so that you don't have to deal with these things anymore. That's why we're here.
Right.
And that's why we're pushing for all this change. So psychological safety is a whole other thing that we could talk about forever. We always talk about at the beginning of our sessions, accept grace and extend grace. So not passing judgment as we're going on, because we want people to feel psychologically safe to share their thoughts and not feel like they have to hide and just kind of dismiss everything going on. But
Yeah.
that could be a whole other podcast.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I had an amazing conversation with our friend Jim Brown around psychological safety. Gosh, I love the topic. But on our last few minutes here together, I just want to open it up to kind of final thoughts from you. What considerations do companies need to really, what's the most important things they need to consider when either bringing in a consultant or just having the initial conversations around DE&I. And you guys are doing great work there at Nika White Consulting. Want to know how people can kind of get in touch with you and get in touch with what you guys are doing. Just kind of close us out a little bit.
For sure. So I'm happy, especially anyone who may be listening that is trying to make this shift into the space of DEI. I know that I've had many people reach out to me. It is very important to have passion and drive for this work. I find it's a little bit different than the other kind of workforces, because you really have to be passionate and care about this and care about people and individuals and changing hearts and minds. But if anyone is interested in reaching out and hearing a little bit more about, how I made that shift, potential recommendations or resources, anyone can reach me out on LinkedIn. It's just Natasha Porizkova, Porizkova. I'm also on Instagram. That's my other most active social platform. But I really just like to hit home for organizations to remember and really take out culture fit in your lexicon when you're thinking about who you want to hire. And if you say culture fit, make a note to yourself and be like, well, what is it about this person that I think would be a fit and maybe is going to eliminate another person from this candidate pool. And also remember that this work isn't about, as you were talking about earlier, hiring diversity for the optics sake. We have equal men and women. We have people of all race and ethnicity. That's great. But what are you doing to make sure that they feel like they are included and that they belong? Because if you get them within your organization and they don't feel that, then you're missing the biggest part of the picture. To me, that's the holistic thing. We want people to feel that they belong, that they're included, that they matter, because they do matter. And you're not going to retain those diverse candidates in that top talent if you can't figure out how to make them belong. And it starts at the personal level, just extending a how are you, or I hope you're doing well, or let's get to know one another. And while we all end up being super busy, I think we could each take, a half hour of our day to just check in with some people, even if it's, at the start of your day when you're moving slow.
Love it.
But yeah, belonging is very important.
And Natasha, I love that. An amazing way to close us out. I want to thank you again for not only supporting and coming on to the podcast, but for the friendship and all the work that, you're doing. I'm excited to see what's in the future for you and us. And, we have a Jim Brown community call today. So,
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you again, and stay warm. You've got a lot of snow there. I saw your
Yes,
Instagram.
there's a foot of snow behind me, and
Yeah,
it's growing.
I saw the dozer in the back.
The snow plow, yeah.
Snow plow, that's it.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you
All
again.
right, well, thank you so much, Joe.
Absolutely.